Okay, well,
thanks. Yeah.
Welcome everyone to today's session at the Northern Real Farming Conference with Nature Friendly Farming Network. I'm just going to share my screen now and begin the presentation. Okay, can everyone see?
Yep.
Fantastic. So, hi everyone, my name is Kirsty Tate. I've met most of you already. I'm the Sustainable Farming Lead for Scotland for the Nature Friendly Farming Network. Welcome to our session, which is titled In It Together, Positive Ways of Farming with Nature under Leasing and Business Arrangements in Scotland. So I'll just quickly go over the programme for today's webinar. We'll start with a brief overview of NFFN, who are sponsoring the Northern Real Farming Conference, and also where we're currently at in Scotland with farming under leasing and business agreements. We've then got three fantastic farmers and growers who will share their stories and experiences. So we've got Claire from Ardros Farm, Bridie from Falkland Farm Kitchen, Lee from the Ecology Centre, all from my home in Fife. So welcome to you and huge thanks for contributing. And we've also got James from the Land Commission here, who's going to give us a bit of an overview of the Land Commission and how more opportunities are being created. Once we've gone through our presentations, we'll stop and we'll be able to answer any questions and have a discussion. So do post up your questions as we go through the webinar, and we'll stop and we'll have a good discussion afterwards. And we hope we're aiming to close at 3 p.m. So who are we? What is the Nature Friendly Farming Network? So we began from a group of farmers who came together 4 years ago to champion a way of farming which is sustainable and good for nature. Our farming members come from a range of backgrounds. We're a very broad church, big, small, organic, conventional, tenant, owner, occupier, etc., etc. The thing that we're all passionate about and our members are passionate about is about ensuring our countryside is productive and bursting with wildlife. So our network is also open to the public and there is no cost to join. We work to raise awareness of nature-friendly farming, sharing insights and experiences, and work together to make better policies for food and farming with all the different governments. We have steering groups supported by sustainable farming leads like myself in all of the nations, so in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And we've just recently published our practical guide called Rethink Farming. And this shares stories from farmers around the UK who are already acting on biodiversity loss and climate mitigation to secure prosperous and resilient futures. And we have some of them joined us today. So do download, use and get in contact to find out more. So why do we want to rethink farming? The landscape in the UK is shaped by farming. I think we all know that 70% of our land mass in the UK is farmed, and this actually goes up to 80% in Scotland. And we also know that not all change in recent times has been desirable. We have depleted soils, our watercourses are degraded, and nature has struggled to cope with the pace of change. So it's really important that we recognise our role in this for the current state of nature in Scotland and the UK. So you can see we rely hugely on pollinators for our crop species, yet a third of our species have been declined since 1980. You'll see the similar kind of stats for UK mammals. 25% are in threat of extinction and 50% of our hedgerows have been lost. And also 97% of our wildfowl meadows have declined since 1930. In terms of Scotland, along with the other UK countries, we're currently placed in the lowest 12% of global countries and territories for biodiversity intactness. In the EU, we've seen a loss of 600 million birds between 1980 and 2017, and the highest losses have been seen amongst farm birds and grassland birds. And finally, in Scotland, 22% of our rivers, estuaries and coastal waters have been adversely affected by land use and pressures such as overgrazing. So we are at a bit of a low point. Well, we are at a low point in terms of our biodiversity in Scotland. And this is one of the things that is driving our agricultural transition, which we are currently working through. So at an individual level, not just at a national level, why is nature loss such a big deal? At an individual level, thriving biodiversity is actually intrinsic to a functioning farm business. Nature is our greatest ally and our greatest resource. And if we don't reverse these losses and declines, then farming will cease to be profitable or sustainable. The bottom line is we need nature and we need a functioning biodiversity species. So this is Denise, and she is on our steering group, and she farms at Pelham Farm in the Borders. And this is an example of organic, pasture for life, low input farming, where nature and livestock are treated, in Denise's words, as allies, not servants. So you'll see what she says here. She says that there must be a balance between productivity for livelihood and productivity for the wildlife as they go hand in hand. She calls for the Scottish Government to invest to help farmers transition to whole farm systems with nature-based approaches that can provide for wildlife and the health of our environment as much as it does for healthy, sustainable food production. So if you do get a chance, please do go and visit Denise and some of our open days, and you can find Pelham at a lot of our farmers markets across the Central Belt and down in the south of Scotland. So as Denise states here, this is essentially what captures what we're trying to work towards in terms of what we think the future needs to be. However, there are still many to be convinced, but I do feel the direction of travel in Scotland is looking hopeful. So going back to the subject of this webinar, who are these people? Who are these people that farm and grow on other people's land? We are a very diverse sector. I say we because these are my people. This is my great Papa William at the bottom here, and my great grandma, Granny Barbara, sitting there working. I'm not sure, she's sorting out potatoes, I think, tatties, either for seed or to feed animals. So when Barbara and William were young, tenancies were in abundance. In the late 19th century, over 90% of farms were tenanted. The opportunity was there for them, and they had options. When the shale oil industry collapsed in West Lothian and their livelihood became harder, they were able to move and take up another tenancy in Perthshire in 1929. They then benefited from the introduction of security of tenure in the 40s, which they're able to pass down that tenancy on their home farm and negotiate secure tenancies on neighbouring farms for their sons. So my mom and brother still farm 2 of these farms, and secure tenancies like the ones we have got are not created anymore. They're very rare. I think we have 2 of the last remaining 4,000 odd left in Scotland. So the type of tenancies that are more common now are limited duration, limited partnerships, modern limited duration tenancies, and short limited duration tenancies, as well as grazing lets. But there's also other different initiatives and arrangements in terms of joint ventures. So we have incentivized employment contracts, share farming, equity arrangements and partnerships, contract farming arrangements, and contract growing. We also have our very unique crossing system in Scotland. Out of 21,292 crofts, there are 15,137 tenanted, and crofts can be found in the north, in Orkney, Shetland, Argyll and Bute, Highland, the Western Isles, and a very lonely owner-occupied one in North Ayrshire, which I didn't realise existed. I'm not sure if James knew that as well, which is great. They're further south, and we are hoping that that trajectory will continue. We have tenanted smallholders. The stats on these are quite hard to obtain. However, we do know that only 75 are currently officially small landholdings and statutory small tenancies, though I'm sure there'll be many, many more rented small holdings on different arrangements in these. And finally, we have community growers, who are a growing sector in Scotland, both on rural and urban land. Again, these are very diverse, and some will be renting land and some will own their land. I couldn't find any stats at the moment, but this is a growing sector in Scotland. We're committed to being a good food nation, and every local authority is required under the Community Empowerment Act to prepare a food growing strategy And also we have the right that communities have in Scotland to apply to transfer public land into community ownership. So I do think that sector is going to grow, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops both in urban areas and rural areas over the next 5-10 years. So although diverse, there's one thing that is very evident, that a good proportion of our land in Scotland is farmed, crofted and worked by people who don't own that land. So we do know that 25% of Scotland's agricultural land is currently farmed by tenant farmers. So this is a point of time just to bring something that is quite close to my heart, and it's terms of good stewardship. We often associate good stewardship with land ownership. But I genuinely think that any person who works in the land on all different durations of leases and arrangements also feels the same level of care and responsibility. So another member of our steering group, Nikki Yoxall, who you might know from Grampian Graziers, wrote this last week, which really resonated with me. So she wrote, "Farming other people's land, what's in it for us? A deep intrinsic connection to the place we call home, collaboration with others, and knowing we are part of a community that is greater than the sum of its parts." I've also been working a bit as well, reflecting on what it means to be a tenant farmer and being brought up in this system. And I was very lucky to join the Pen and Plough writing programme last winter, and spent time with other interested people who wanted to learn about writing and capturing their experiences. And I think this is, for me, how I feel about being a tenant farmer, is that we do not possess our farms as property, but as a family have been lucky to be possessed by them for almost a century. This land has given us much more than we have given it, and we stand on the shoulders of many farmers who've worked this soil before us. So there is a really deep sense of care amongst our sector, and I think it should be acknowledged and encouraged by creating more opportunities. At the very heart of tackling our biodiversity and climate emergencies is people who care and feel they can have an impact. So it's a really important sector to build and care for and make sure in the transition that they're not left behind. So why is this sector of people who work other people's land important? We know, we have a sense, I think all of us have a sense, that land ownership is out of the reach of probably the majority of our population now. The cost of hill, farm and croftland has seen exponential increase in the last 20 years. So this is just some of the stats. Last year was the lowest, supply of farmland was the lowest on record. Prime arable land peaked at £16,000 an acre. Average price in 2000 was £2,000 an acre. Plantable hill ground is now attracting prices up to £3,000 an acre, which is 30 times higher than it was just 10 years ago in 2011. And I just did a quick search because I'm always looking to see what's out there in terms of small holdings and crofts and what might be possible. And at the moment, bare owner occupier crofts, so that's just land, no house. They're coming in at maybe 5 acres for offers over 160, an acre for offers over 70. So you can see that's quite high. Small holdings, there's something getting advertised at the moment in West Fife, which is basically an old dilapidated barn with 10 acres of land, and they're looking for offers over 300 grand for that. This has been reflected in a recent survey with the Scottish Association for Young Farmers, and when asked what the biggest barrier to accessing land was, 35% said availability of land on the open market, and 23% said availability of finance. I think mortgages are getting increasingly hard to get, especially for the next generation below me. It's not as easy as it once was, big deposits, and even with quite high income, you're not getting a huge amount. So it is out of reach for a lot of people, and this situation isn't going to get easier. We are still yet to feel the full impact of carbon offsetting in Scotland. So for the majority of new entrants, tenancy or other kinds of joint ventures are maybe the only routes into farming and growing currently. But unfortunately, Scotland also has one of the lowest proportions of rented land anywhere in Europe. We have quite a brittle land ownership and now becoming management system where too few companies and individuals own and manage our land. I think similar to the environment, a healthy society and economy requires diversity. From a social perspective, I think we're beginning to see the impact in rural depopulation in Scotland, notably in the West Coast authorities and those in rural areas. So they're witnessing people moving into larger towns and cities for employment and education opportunities. And as we know, migration is heavily concentrated amongst those younger populations and leaving increasingly aging populations in these areas. Really delighted to have James here today. So he's from the Scottish Land Commission. So there is things that is getting looked at. There are things getting done. And they're working to create a Scotland where everybody who benefits from the ownership, management and use of land. So he'll tell us later on some of the solutions that are being worked on to create more opportunities for existing and new entrants to farming, crofting and growing. I also think that diversity of nature-friendly land ownership management is better for climate and nature too. I read an article in the National Geographic last week, which was actually looking at land management in Spain. It stated part of the reason why less intensive traditional agricultural landscapes are so biodiverse is because they're a mosaic. Fields, woodlots and orchards are bordered by rock walls, hedges and uncultivated margins. The different human uses leave space for wild plants and animals which find refuge in these zones. The result is a sort of domesticated wilderness. We are beginning to be aware of how important it is to have humans working in landscapes. This is known as land sharing, not land sparing. And also how important collaboration is, as Delhi states here. Nature depends on landscape approaches, not just between landowners, but also between landowners and those managing the land. So with a sizable sector of people already working other people's land in Scotland and ambition that this will grow, as Douglas Bell states here, we should not underestimate what they can achieve as we navigate through our agricultural transition. So I'm really delighted today to have 3 examples of this type of land owner-manager collaboration with me here. All 3 are very different to each other in size, tenancy agreements and operational models. They all farm and grow on other people's land, and all are examples of what this kind of collaboration can achieve for both nature and people. So I'm going to hand over to Claire very shortly. So once we go through the farming stories, and James's presentation will stop for a brief question and answer and discussion. So please do keep posting up your questions through this, and we'll aim to finish at 3 o'clock. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Claire. Oh, you're on mute. Who will share her screen?
All right,
so welcome, Claire. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'll mute myself.
There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that. So I am Claire Pollock and I'm from Ardross Farm and Farm Shop. So we've been farming at Ardross since 1968 and we opened our farm shop in 2005. I wasn't really sure what everyone would want to see, so I've just given an overview of what we do and our contracts that we have. So first of all, here's my family. So you'll notice I'm number 3 at the end. I'm the youngest daughter of 3. My mum and dad used to farm here and have the tenancy here. Unfortunately, my dad passed away a couple of years ago, so I've taken on the tenancy myself. So I manage the farm. My sister Nikki, number 1 daughter, obviously nothing to do with favoritism there, just age. She works for me and she manages the shop, but we all work together, which is really good. So our land holding, this is an old map, so it's not got all of our land on it, but it does have some of it. So I own no land at all. I have a 91 Act tenancy and an old style tenancy of 360 acres. It's actually the land down at the bottom here and it's closest to the sea. We also contract farm a further 800 acres. Now the land that we contract farm, that's had a change of tenancies. So we actually originally had a 91 Act tenancy on that land in my granddad's time. To be quite honest, the land at Ardross was much better land, and at the time you could only have an old style tenancy on one farm, so we actually gave up the tenancy at Gibbleston and Balmakin and we moved down to Ardross. At that time the landlord of the farm that we gave up the tenancy on said, this is just crazy, we want you to farm, you've been looking after the land for so long, can we come to some agreement where you continue to farm? So I've still got the bit of paper, actually. It was an A4 bit of paper, and their signatures took up half the A4 bit of paper, and the rest was basically just, you agree to farm and look after the land, right, let's get on with this. So we've actually been farming that contract farming land longer than 1968. So just recently we have moved on to contract farming arrangement, mainly just, it wasn't an old style tenancy, it was kind of rolling contracts depending on what was available. And obviously the contract farming method with showing the landlord as the active farmer and things was more attractive to them. We also take another roughly 250 acres of grass rents, some on the same estate and some from different smaller land owners roundabout, just to keep our cattle on. So that is kind of what we do. So the rest of the family, the top row are the guys that work on the farm. So I have 3 guys that work with me. Jim is 80 something, and I better not tell you what, because I'll probably get it wrong. But he came to work with us when my dad was 14 and has worked with us all the time. His son, Scott, is now our foreman, and he used to get off the school bus at the end of the road. Well, he used to get on the school bus at the end of the road and then get off the school bus at the farm next door and run back so he could work for us, just so his mum didn't know. So he has worked with us since he was about 12. And his son's Mark is now our tractorman. So he is about 25 now. And thankfully, he's just had another son. So we're really hoping to keep this line of work going. And of course, there's lots of other people that work in our shop. So all in all, we employ about 25 local people. And unfortunately, I don't employ Gino, Gordon and Fred, which are in those photos, but they did come to visit us, which was quite good fun. So what do we do here? So we have a farm shop. Basically, we were skint. My mum and dad keep on telling me that they had 3 very expensive daughters and the farm wasn't making enough money. So we needed to kind of think out the box. It's quite interesting with the tenanted sector, actually. You normally find when we were trying to diversify, a lot of the businesses in the UK that we went to see were tenants, because when hard times hit, it does hit tenants first, and they're the ones that have to think out the box before anyone else. So it was really good to see all those kind of tenants and the ideas that they have got. So we decided to open up a shop. We were already producing beef and we're selling it to supermarkets. My dad was one of the biggest broccoli and cauliflower growers in Scotland at the time, and he was getting fed up of the unsustainable nature of that. So he thought, we should do it for ourselves. We were really lucky with the timing. When we thought about doing it, was just when the local food thing was kind of taking off. So that really helped us a lot. There was also a lot of other farmers and a lot of other tenants that were kind of diversifying into other things. So it made getting products for our shop really interesting. We've got ice cream from dairy farmers. We've got garlic from garlic farmers. We've got mint from a farm that's put their whole farm down in mint. It's just fantastic to see all the different ideas that the farmers in the area have. But yeah, so we also sell Bridie's salads. So yeah, she will talk to you later about that. But lots of different farmers and lots of different growers. And we really just wanted to be the link between these farmers and customers. And we wanted to be the one-stop shop. So we wanted to be the supermarket. So you could just buy everything you needed for a weekly shop in a local shop from local people. We realized very quickly that that was a great idea, but people needed convenience. So people want to eat well and they want to eat locally, but they're also really busy. They've got children, they've got lives, they've got work, they've got a whole host of things going on, and we needed to make it convenient. So we started our own kind of farmhouse kitchen. This was also kind of spurred on by the fact that we were trying to sell our beef. And in the area we're in just now, there's lots of fantastic cooks, your top end, your fillets, your sirloins, that could all sell no bother. It was the kind of lower end stew, braising, beef, bones, fat. What do we do with that? So we needed to do something in the kitchen to make sure we could sell the whole animal, because we needed to make money. So we made bone broth or stock from the bones. We made beef dripping from the fat. We make steak pies, mince rounds, all of that sort of thing, just to add value to what we're doing and also make it convenient to people. We make sausage casseroles. It's kind of expanded now, and we do like soups, stocks, chutneys, home baking, all sorts of other stuff. So yeah, when a customer comes in and asks us for a product, first of all, we try and see if there's any other local people making it or other farmers in the UK making it. And if not, we punt it to the kitchen and hopefully they come up with an idea. So although we do buy vegetables out and about, we do try and grow some ourselves. So I've got about 10 acres of vegetables, a whole different mixture of vegetables from potatoes, squash, broccoli, onions, everything like that. A lot of weeds in there too, which I seem to grow better than I can grow anything else. But there's lots of challenges from it. We went from farmers that were growing 300 acres of broccoli fairly successfully to having to grow 30 heads of broccoli that are ready every single day for as long a season as possible. And it was a complete mind shift to kind of get our heads round thinking that. And there's still some things that we don't know. We always look in amazement. One of the biggest things I buy from Falkland Kitchen Gardens is their salad leaves. And I have tried literally about 7 years to grow salad leaves and I cannot do it. And every week they come in with the most fantastic salad leaves and I have no idea how they manage it. So I have still got lots and lots of learning to do. Because we're a tenanted farm, it does mean that some things are difficult. We don't have any right to irrigate. We don't have any water on the farm. So we are trying to do it without irrigation. We also are not allowed to put up kind of polytunnels and things, or it's slightly more difficult for us to put up polytunnels and things. So we are growing everything outside on the land, just using a traditional rotation. This is a wee slide. I do bees as well. So I've got 10 hives of bees. I think it's really important to get pollinators back into everything. So again, very big learning curve about bees, but I've up to 10 hives now and they're doing fantastic. So I suppose one of the most important things, well, kind of biggest things that we do on the farm is our cattle. So we have got stabilizer cattle. So we've got about 125 cows and we put all their finishing stock through the shop. So it's a kind of really hard balance just now. We're a closed herd just to get our health status up there. So it makes it difficult for us when we're renting land because we have to double fence everywhere. We can't have nose-to-nose contact with anyone else's stock. We need to make sure the grazing is kind of clean grazing, just to make sure that our cattle don't pick anything up. So yeah, it's completely fine now on tenanted land that we've had for a wee while, but it does take a wee while once you get new tenanted land to get into that cycle and to make sure everything is up for it. We are pasture for life certified, which means all the cattle and the sheep are 100% grass fed. So again, this means that grassland is really, really important to us. This kind of works to our advantage with tenanted land because we really have to look after that grass. We stitch in quite a lot of clovers. We are doing I don't do mob grazing, but I do a lot of paddock grazing and strip grazing. And the people that we're renting the grass from really appreciate that. They really see the kind of benefit to them of letting land to that sort of system. So we calve 3 times a year. And again, I suppose just because I'm a tenant, I don't have a lot of cattle housing. So that kind of pushed us to outdoor. So our cattle are all outwintered. We're really, really lucky where we are. It's kind of sandy and sand dunes. And to be honest, if I had had the shed here, I probably would have had a different system. And I don't think that's the right system. I think cattle being outside is really working for us. And I think in some respects, it pushed us to do what we should have been doing all along. It's also got sheep. So I've got 130 ewes. They're all easy care. I like an easy life. So my cows all calve themselves. My ewes all lamb themselves. I don't even need to shear them. It's great. My dad used to call me the lazy farmer. I'll take the title. So yeah, so no tail docking, no shearing. They basically just get on with it. They're all pasture for life. They stay out all year round. Yeah, they're fairly easygoing. On the arable side of things, we have a huge rotation. So spring barley, winter wheat, winter oilseed rape, spring oilseed rape, spring beans and fodder crop. Just because I was getting it so easy on the livestock side of things, I thought I better up my game on the arable. We used to be a complete plough-based system, kind of power harrow drill. And about 10 years ago, just when we were opening the shop, we thought, you know, it's fine that the shop is making money and it's allowing the beef enterprise to make money, but we need to make sure every part of our business is making money and is sustainable. so yeah, when we went down the Claydon direct drilling route, a lot of people say they go down it for all the kind of benefits, the environmental benefits, the soil benefits. To be quite frank with us, we were trying to reduce input costs at the start to make the thing viable. It was only maybe year 3 or 4 that we got into it that we actually realized that, wow, there is a whole bunch of other benefits. When people start talking about it, you think, yeah, is that actually true? Does that make a difference? But no, now some of our fields will be 10, 12 years direct drilled. We are seeing massive differences. The kind of harder land that we farm up the back is probably where we notice the most difference. The sandy kind of good land at the bottom, the direct drilling really works, but the marginal land is really where we see the difference. So I suppose there's lots of learning to do. We're doing cover crops, we're doing green manures, all that sort of stuff, and we are learning every year. I make horrific mistakes and they're always right beside the road, which is really handy. I put a lot of oil radishes in this year as a kind of cover crop, and they were absolutely massive and a complete disaster to get rid of. But you need to make these mistakes to see where you're going right, and we are doing a lot of good things at the same time. So yeah, it's a constant learning aspect of it, which I really enjoy. When my dad was actually dying, he said, I'm really, really sad because agricultural is on the verge of this massive revolution, and what we do in the next 5 years is going to be so exciting, and he was going to miss it all. And it really is. There's so much coming out that we've never even known before. And for the likes of me coming up, who, I used to be an accountant, I only started farming 5 years ago, it's a fantastic place to start because no one actually knows anything. So I'm not 60 years behind the next guy. I am just right there with them. So it makes it much easier from that sense of things. And that's about it, really. There was a short video there, but we'll miss that out. So that's me done, really. So I think, is it Bridie next?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Claire. That's brilliant. And yeah, what an amazing insight into your farm and how you manage. And I think your dad was right. I think we are at a cusp of something quite exciting. And
it's so exciting.
And there's lots
enthusiastic. The last 10 years, he'd just been doing the same thing for so long. It was just a cycle. And the last 10 years, he was actually looking at, all the new and different techniques and things. And it got a bit of enthusiasm back into the whole.
Well, that's what we hear. I think that's the big bit that I play about the Nature Friendly Farming Network. The type of farming that they're doing kind of injects a bit of joy and love back into the industry, and that's any farmer we speak to that's been transitioning and changing their practice, that is exactly what they feed back. So I think there's certainly something in terms of well-being and health of our actual farmers and growers as well. So no, it's amazing to hear that. So Bridie, it'd be great to hear about your story. I'll just mute myself and just share your screen.
Oh, brilliant. Hi everyone, I'm Bridie Marshall and I'm from Falkland Kitchen Farm. My husband and I run the farm. We rent 5 acres from the Falkland estate, and we supply the local community with home delivered veg boxes. So we supply 100 households a week, and as well as independent retailers such as Ardross, and restaurants in Fife, Perth and Dundee. We also have a catering side of the business. My husband's a chef, so we use produce that we've grown on the field to cater for pop-up restaurants and other events, which is a great opportunity for us to share the story of the food we've grown all the way from the seed to the plate. And that's a lovely part of what we do. I didn't grow up in farming at all. It was kind of as far from it as you could have gotten. You might tell from my accent, but I grew up in the States, in New Jersey, which is actually the most densely populated state in America. So farms weren't something I even saw growing up. And it certainly wasn't on my list of what I thought was an available career option for me. And I think that's an intuition that a lot of people have, and sometimes it's kind of justified. It's the most common way to enter farming as a career in Europe is still definitely through succession. but at the same time, there's not enough new farmers. You know, the average age of farmers in the UK is 59, and farms aren't being passed on to the new generations at a successive rate. So there is this question of how people can transition into viewing farming as a career that's open. And from our experience, it's been just such a privilege to be able to think about food systems and contribute to the food industry, because it's this amazing connection between so many things in our society that are so important and need to change, from health to inequality to dealing with climate change. Food is at the center, and if we want the world to be greener, healthier, and more equal, then we need to kind of take our first steps by looking at the food system. So if even on our tiny 5-acre plot we can be thinking about some of these questions, it's just been such a privilege for us, and we're really passionate about sharing our story and showing how it is possible to enter farming as a career when it's not necessarily been your background. So I think how it happened for me was initially cultivating the ambition. So I came to Scotland for university when I was 18, and I was immediately, I fell in love with Fife, and I loved just the vibrant food scene and getting to explore farms and farm shops, and really kind of relishing in food production being so close to where you're actually eating, and starting to understand more about it. My husband and I actually studied philosophy at St Andrews, so we also had the opportunity to study environmental ethics, and we really kind of started to become clear with what we wanted to do, and realized we wanted to find a way to practically apply some of our ideas surrounding the ethics of the food system and how it relates with the natural environment in a really practical and hands-on way that would also have a tangible benefit for our local community. And so then after we graduated, we were amazingly ended up at the right place at the right time. And we met Ninian Stewart, who's the hereditary keeper of the Falkland estate. And he was kind of exploring how they could express the estate's mission, which was for life to give land to the people, land to give life to the people, and people to give life to the land. And how they could kind of take this mission statement and really explore innovative ways to open up the estate's land to the community and allow them to create livelihoods through that land. So the estate had just launched the new farmer scheme. This was back in 2014 now. And that was how we were able to take our first steps into a farming career. So the first thing was having the opportunity to cultivate the ambition. And the second thing was having some of the barriers to entering farming reduced, which was what happened through the creation of the new farmer scheme on the estate. And the new farmer scheme was definitely developed with the idea that it could be a model for how you could inspire other landowners in Scotland to think about creating new tenancies. And so just a tiny bit about, and I'm sure, and Kirsty's kind of already touched on this, and I'm sure James will as well, but a little bit about why this model is needed. Scotland actually has the most concentrated pattern of private land ownership is the most concentrated pattern in the world, and half of the land is owned by 0.008% of the population. And at the same time, the number of holdings available for tenant farmers has decreased since the 1880s. So access to land is a huge issue, and having models to show that it works is really important part of kind of tackling that. So I think the model was kind of set up, and in my mind, I view it as tackling the 3 reasons why tenant farms have been declining. So the first one is farm amalgamations. So, farms being combined into bigger and bigger units, which is partially encouraged by how the subsidy system works, where you're rewarded for farming more land, not necessarily how you farm that land. And then also public subsidies for agriculture were also outweighing what a landowner could take in rent. So it would make more sense for the landowner to keep the land and claim the subsidy than actually rent the land out. And the third reason being with increased security of tenure, it was more risk for the landowner. And I think people are still concerned by the thought that there might be right to buy. And so our arrangement with the estate kind of tackles these 3 issues. And so the first thing was to demonstrate that it can be financially sustainable for the landowner. So our rent is actually calculated based on what the field would have generated in profit if it had been a barley crop, which is quite interesting. And actually, it's designed for this system where they were renting the land to people who are going to set up a horticultural enterprise, because obviously you couldn't do that with Arable, because so that's kind of, so it was really vital to the scheme that it was small plots of land which would be rented to people who are going to start organic horticulture, and so that was kind of also part of the mission, was to prove that small holdings were financially viable, and this whole trend towards farm amalgamation wasn't essential to create a viable business. And the second, in our lease, actually, the estate retains the right to claim single farm payment for our field, which actually wouldn't have made a significant difference to us anyway, because we're renting 2 hectares, so it's under the amount, so we wouldn't have been able to claim the subsidy anyway. Our lease, it's a modern limited duration tenancy, an MLTD. So we had 5 years, and then there's a break clause at which it was renewed. So it becomes a 10-year lease, and then a rolling 10-year lease. So these leases were actually set up in order to encourage new entrants, actually encourage landowners to make land available to new entrants. So we were trying to balance the needs for the tenant to have a secure tenancy and the landowner to feel that they still had some control, and particularly with the 5-year break clause if things weren't working out. So essentially, has this model, I'm just going to quickly discuss if this model's worked for us, if it's worked for the estate, and how it's worked for our local community and the environment. So I think in terms of, from our perspective, the main thing was that it gave us the opportunity in the first place, which is something that we certainly weren't expecting, and we're incredibly lucky to have come across. Ninian and the estate, I think, were very open-minded in terms of looking at the what type of tenants they would expect. We came to the estate without any farming experience, just with a lot of passion and energy and enthusiasm, and a commitment to learn, and a commitment to take care of the land to the best of our ability. I think a lot of people probably would have taken one look at us and turned us away, but the estate was keen to take our enthusiasm and allow us the time to develop the skills over the 7 years that we've been there. It was an incredibly steep learning curve, and there were lots of times when we weren't sure if it was going to work out. But now we've been on the land for 7 years, and we've just won the Soil Association Best of Organic Market Award for the best small farm under 10 hectares. So we're incredibly proud about that, and it was really made us think of our first year on the farm when we had no idea what we were doing, and it's amazing to be given the opportunity to get to this place. But there have also been some challenges with the lease agreement. There's the infrastructure required for horticulture as opposed to agriculture is very different. There are lots of things that would be great if we could have on our field. It'd be great if we could have an electricity supply, hard standing, an access track into the field. All of these investments, we don't quite have the security to be able to justify. At the same time, the estate wouldn't be particularly keen on them because they need security as well, and they need to know if we were to move on that they would be able to use the field for larger scale agriculture. So it's not going to be great for them if they have a paved track into the field or a concrete hard standing that we would use for compost comes is not something they would want in the middle of their field of barley. So that's been definitely something to navigate. And part there are, we have been able to work around the issues, and it's not a bad thing to really think what infrastructure you can do without. You make a more resilient business if you can do the most you can with small resources sometimes. But we have gotten to this point where we do feel in order to grow, we could definitely do with some more infrastructure investment. And that's always going to be a challenge. I think the second issue is the lack of ability to diversify. It's specified in our lease that we're a purely horticultural enterprise, which it's great. That's what we signed up to do. But for many farms of our size, diversification is an important way of increasing your income, whether that be through being able to invite people onto the farm, having a farm shop, being able to share your story, tourism. Those type of enterprises aren't on the cards for us. So it's been a matter of finding ways to work around that. So for example, the catering can kind of function as a separate business, and that does not happen on the site of the farm, but it does allow us to take the story and show people what we're doing, even if we're not as able to actually welcome people onto the farm. So it's just required some out of the box thinking sometimes, and how we can add value and get that diversification without stepping on the toes of the estate or contradicting our lease. So now just quickly moving on to how it's worked for the estate. I think the estate have gained in us a partner who is always going to be willing to help contribute to their projects. So the estate has run a number of community projects such as Local Food Works, and at the moment they're running Neighbor Food, which is an online food hub. So it's great for them to then be able to have, say, oh, this produce was grown on the Falkland estate, and to be able to showcase that they're producing local food in addition to what the home farm is already producing, some of which isn't actually able to be sold locally just yet. The estate also has its own diversification. So as well as having the home farm, they run events such as weddings. And it's just something else that they can add to the package, that they could invite a caterer who's using produce grown on the estate. And then finally, any publicity that we are able to generate as a farm, we can share that back with the estate and the landowner, and it can be a win-win for everyone. The estate's challenges, I think, it maybe took slightly more time investment than they were expecting in the very beginning, just to make sure everyone was on the same page with, what we were allowed to do and what we wouldn't, and the aesthetics of the estate, and making sure we weren't stepping on the toes of the other estate users. And I think there's always been a slight tension between how permanent we're going to be, and that's a constant back and forth discussion, and so I think that can be a struggle kind of from both sides. And then finally, how it's worked for the local community. So it's amazing to have a small farm be supported by the local community. The size of our farm allows us to have a very complex system. So we grow over 70 different varieties of fruits, herbs, and vegetables. And maintaining that complexity would be a lot harder at a larger scale. And through that complex and diverse system, you're able to foster more wildlife and have that biodiversity, which will support pollinators and other wildlife on the field. We're also highly productive, being able to supply 100 families each week without using the entire five acres as well. Only half of it is ever in production at times, so that the other half is in long-term fertility building, and also enabling us to leave spaces untouched for wildlife. There's also techniques that are kind of specific to a small scale. So we do quite a lot of no-dig farming, and so there's no tillage of the soil, which becomes much more challenging when you're working at scale, but has some great benefits, such as being able to preserve soil structure, better nutrient cycling, a more diverse biology in the soil as well, and greater resilience to things like issues like drought. But all of that takes time and labor, and it's hard to do with machinery. So a lot of what we do is by hand, and without machinery. And then I think very importantly, we're also able to have a real direct connection with the consumer. We're constantly speaking to our veg box customers, and we're able, through getting the veg box locally, they're much more connected. They understand where their food comes from. They learn things like seasonality and how things are grown. So we're able to play an educational role. We go and talk in schools. We run cooking workshops. All of these benefits that being really ingrained in the local community allows you to do. And finally, small farms and farms that are selling locally are really great for building community wealth. So every £10 that's spent on a local veg box scheme results in £25 being total spending in the local economy, compared to if you're going to go and buy that from a supermarket, it's only £14 ends up back in the local economy. So it's just a lovely extra benefit of creating that really short supply chain. So I think the Estate's New Farmer Scheme has definitely been kind of an innovative and pioneering project, and there's been lots that we've had to learn on both sides, and hitches in the road. But I think ultimately it's had some real advantages for us as the tenants, as well as the estate as the landowners and our local community and environment.
Fantastic, Bridie. That was fascinating, and I think what you'll find is I understand the give and take, but as a pioneer of this kind of relationship, there would have been a lot of give and take at the start, but I think what you'll find is, the role that you and Falkland have played to actually really push this and actually see how it could work on the ground is going to be so important. I know, there is larger farmers that are interested in this, and how can they create more opportunities. And I think there's huge potential in this, with larger estates and larger farms looking at actually how they can use their land more productively, how they can actually create more opportunities. And Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to hear just how that's going. So well done both. Well done you and Falkland Estate, and great that you're pushing the barriers and you're really trying to see what's possible, and hopefully, you know, we'll be able to get more of this going, because we do need it. And I do agree with you about the role of the smaller farmer as well, and communities and direct selling. So we're going to introduce Lee next. Don't worry, I'll just say don't worry about time. We are a very small group, so I think it's more important that we record and we hear these presentations. So please don't rush. We have plenty of time. And then after Lee, we'll bring in James from the Scottish Land Commission to tell us about what's happening and what's in the future for us and what they're working on. Okay, so welcome Lee from the Ecology Centre.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Like my piece of land, I will keep this small. I'm from the Ecology Centre, which is based in Kinghorn, just on the shores of Kinghorn Loch. So about 6 years ago, we received funding from the National Lottery to purchase the land that we're on and manage it as community land. But that left us without any areas where we could actually grow or utilise any of the land as a proper growing resource. So Kinghorn Community Land Association have leased us 2,000 square metres of land to form as a community garden, which we use basically to create as much of our own food possible. Yes, but we have to manage the land for community accessibility because nothing's allowed to be closed off. So that presents quite new issues that maybe others don't actually experience. It's a reciprocal arrangement, so we don't pay any money, unlike most tenant farmers. We have responsibilities to take over other parts of KCLA land, which we manage once again for public safety, site conditioning, pathing, and we also manage a community orchard. We initially had a very relaxed outlook on how we were using the land, and we focused mainly on it being classed as a volunteering resource. So it was a very relaxed approach to how the garden was put together. I come from quite a different background. Previously, I was IT, and I spent 10 years in the Highlands as a crofter. So I came down and taken over the garden, and we've this year put over 1,000 hours re-establishing it, putting it into a condition where it's actually fully functional, and a little bit like Brady's saying, trying to utilize the land as efficiently as possible, but also with nature in mind. So we're fully organic. We make all our own produce, our natural fertilizers, and we manage with nature in mind. So we have wildlife ponds, we have open composting areas, edible hedging all the way around. We have minimal netting, so we do no netting of our soft fruits, which for some people seems to be a conflict as to why you would grow it, but it's surprising just how much of a share nature does leave you if you leave it like this. As I've said, volunteering is a major part of what we do, but the land has to become properly used, otherwise KCLA may see that it's not being used to its full advantage. So we're now feeding into our weekend cafe, so we're providing seasonal garden to plate recipes where we focus that it's food meters, not food miles. We've recently started a community fridge, so any excess is going towards those or has been given to our volunteers to pass on. We have a large shared Wednesday volunteer lunch, which we feed upwards of 30 people. And also on our Thursdays, we utilise the growing areas. As we've got 2 polytunnels, so we become dementia friendly for the whole day. So we run 2 sessions outdoors, which has the benefits of having people living with dementia and their non-paid carers to be outdoors doing an activity together. And this year we provided the Royal Caledonian Horticultural Society Grow, Learn in Nature Awards, which has taken people from all walks of life. Okay, they have a diagnosis of dementia, but they've suddenly been able to find out things about composting, how to use land, how to recover water, successional sharing. Some people have even said to us, it's like, that seed will not grow into this, and then 2 weeks later they see the seedling, and it's still trying to convince them that it's going to grow into food. Is a strange thing that, it's like, yes, that's where a carrot does come from. Yeah, we get some issues with how that's managed, but we sometimes, if the lines aren't as straight as we like, we just correct them slightly later on for when they come back. But now that we've become quite structured, we actually had a novel experience of having excess produce. So next year we're looking at maybe going a little bit forward where we could start working on some type of box system, but we're just not of the right size where we could make any form of guarantee. So we're already in conversation with a local community group that's just established. He has some routes to market through some restaurants, and is looking at doing a sustainable box. So we might be able to feed into that. But we also have a few extra problems that come about with managed land. Is one of the rules is that we're not fenced off. So this presents us with problems as the public utilising the land. We've suffered from vandalism, including destruction of one of our polytunnels, and obviously crop loss, including somebody taking the entire crop of onion sets one year. So we're having to come up with new ways of approaching how we engage with the public, whether that being through a structured course such as the Grow, Learn in Nature Awards, where people are bought into what we're doing, increasing our volunteering throughout the week and maybe into the weekends, implementing a children's managed allotment for Kinghorn Primary. So that's engaging with the children straight from the start. These are just different problems. We don't actually have the problem of manpower. We have problems with people believing they have the skills to actually do what we do. So getting people involved in growing is as important as the growing for us. Now, the fears of the future of, as Bridie has said, is very difficult for you to sometimes believe that you can commit to what you really need. So we invested £2,500 in a large polytunnel 2 years ago, and there's still that fear that is that investment going to become taken away at any point, even though there's no real message that that will ever happen. It's always in the back of your mind. So investment in the land or in any structures, even during the redesign, was over 1,000 staff hours and untold amount of volunteering hours. So you're wanting to make sure that you're getting the buyback for that effort. So you're almost chasing your tail, thinking, am I doing this right? Am I doing enough for the lease? What am I perceived as? Oh no, I've made a change. Is it the right change? Because we have made a massive change this year. So we've also got a new housing estate that is encroaching out of Kinghorn right onto our doorstep. So there's the fear of just what the price of the land is as you go forward. That a change of policy could suddenly mean that you're priced out. There's a small parcel of land just on our boundaries that's going for £6,000, and I think that's only about 300 square meters. So you could barely put a couple of houses on it. But so yeah, we're in a unique situation where we do receive some funding, so we don't have to make money from the land, but we do have to pay back for why we're getting the land. So we're all the same. I'm a lot smaller. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I was so glad Lee came along, because I think in terms of diversity of people and all different types and examples of how people are using other people's lands to grow, and the different challenges, but the different opportunities. Now, I used to work for the Ecology Centre. I've never seen a patch of land used to its fullest capacity. I mean, when we talk about integrated land management, I would encourage everyone to go to the Ecology Centre just to see the breadth of stuff they do in this little, I mean, it's tiny. How big is it, Lee? I mean, what you own? Oh.
I did it, hold on. Yeah, we own basically 5 acres, but we also have a second lease where we manage a community woodland from Rio Tinto Sync, who basically Alcan. But yeah, it's a struggle to. We're getting smaller and smaller, but we've still got the same amount of responsibilities.
Yeah, and I think even just, I mean, to go and to Kinghorn Loch and huge different types of landowners around the loch. You have community landowners, you've got charitable, you've got private, and you've got Rio Tinto, the biggest mining company in the world. I mean, it's really interesting, but yeah, just great to hear about how that works and the challenges and opportunities. I'm going to hand over to James now. Really interested to hear about the Land Commission and what's coming up and what's getting worked on at the moment and where the opportunities are.
Cool. Thanks, Kirsty. I will try my best to make this interesting then. As it says, I'm James. I'm the Policy and Practice Lead with the Scottish Land Commission. We're based up in Inverness, although obviously all at home at the moment. And essentially what I'll do is I'll give a wee run through about what the Land Commission does, why we exist, and then focus in on the agricultural holdings work that we do. So just by way of background, particularly for those south of the border, land reform in Scotland is something that has a very extensive history. The oldest land reform related act that still in force is the Common Good Act of 1491, in desperate need of modernisation, but it's still there, governing how common good properties in boroughs, and that includes things like links and green space, should be managed for the benefit of the residents there. So very much a link back to what was being talked about, or what's been highlighted earlier around kind of urban growing opportunities, and in fact many allotments in some of the boroughs around Scotland are on common good land, and that's exactly the sort of purpose you would expect them to be used for. So coming more into the modern age, the Agricultural Holdings Act, particularly 1991, that set out the terms of the secure tenancies that people have talked about earlier, vitally important, and then the reforms in 2003. The original Land Reform Act from the Scottish Parliament in 2003 as well, so guaranteeing things like the right to roam in Scotland, introducing the first community right to buy and the Crofton community absolute right to buy, pivotal pieces of work there. And then moving slightly more closer to our present time, the Community Empowerment Act, which instituted community asset transfer powers. So that gave communities the right to acquire, not necessarily buy, but acquire public land. And then the Land Reform Act 2016, which set up the Land Commission, along with introducing the right to buy for sustainable development, which is another really interesting power. Whenever community would like to use it, we'd love to see that happen. Still not happened yet. And also introduced some tweaks to agricultural holdings legislation. So introduced a tenant farming commissioner, who I'll talk about later, but also updated things like the modern limited duration tenancies and some other kind of conditions, and crucially introduced relinquishments and assignations, which I'll again touch on briefly as well. More generally, land reform is something that probably sits higher up the list of priorities in the psyche in Scotland than perhaps it does south of the border. We obviously have a pretty traumatic history in some parts of the country when it comes to land issues. As Bridie mentioned earlier, the concentration of ownership in Scotland is certainly the highest in the developed world, if not the world. But for our work as well, it's also always worth bearing in mind that reform is a process, it's not a goal. There's no end objective, there's no kind of perfect landscape of what a perfect kind of Scotland would look like. It's always going to be an evolving picture as society changes, as needs change, as our understanding of the natural world changes. So reform is very much a process. It's not an end goal for us. So in a nutshell, the Land Reform Act 2016 was essentially set up to advocate for a modern system of varied ownership, which enables communities to flourish, development to be sustainable, and where disputes are minimal. And in turn, that kind of very much sets out the remit of our work, which is for a vision of a fair, inclusive, and productive system of ownership, management, and use of land that delivers benefit for all the people of Scotland. And it's worth just reinforcing that is all land in Scotland, not just rural land. So very much urban land as well. And our key overarching objectives to achieve that are by focusing on productivity, diversity, and accountability. And there's plenty more on our website about all of this. So this is just a skim through of kind of our top areas. And then the priority areas of work, land for housing and development. So very much urban, but also there's been significant work on rural housing, which ties into opportunities for agriculture, particularly for new entrants and for people who don't have a familial connection to agriculture, who are looking to move to rural areas. Land use decision making, again, agriculture is by far the biggest land use in Scotland. How that evolves, changes, whether it competes with forestry, whether they work hand in hand, whether it competes with carbon, whether it works hand in hand. All these are massive issues and ongoing issues and things that we need to really think about very carefully. And then modernising land ownership. So very much looking at the structure of ownership within the country, looking at models of ownership and governments, perhaps looking towards yes, community ownership that's been around for the last few decades, but also looking to more innovative models, so things like perhaps cooperatives, different types of hybrid ownership, so whether that's involving local authorities and private interests or other public actors with communities or individuals, and really kind of learning, I think, a lot in that area around what happens in the rest of the UK and in Ireland and in Europe as well, because there are a wealth of different models that are really interesting and really could make some significant differences to the way we think about, use, own and manage land. And then finally, agricultural holdings, which I'll talk about in a fair bit of detail. Crucially, though, for us, it's not just about talking and researching and writing reports. It's very much about getting out and speaking to people, and hearing what the concerns are, hearing what the worries are, and also what the ambitions and the hopes and the dreams are as well, and trying to link all those together and getting that critical but constructive feedback into our work, because we can't be good public servants if we're not serving the public, and that means we need to engage, we need to be challenged, we need to be able to articulate our ideas and thoughts and really work with landowners and land managers and people who are trying to get into the agricultural sector and communities and everyone to build a system and a vision for what we want. So agricultural holdings is a fairly large chunk of our work. We are home to the Tenant Farming Commissioner, currently Bob McIntosh, who's a really lovely guy. His role was established in the 2016 Land Reform Act, and essentially he acts as a kind of ombudsman for the tenanted sector, and as part of that role, he kind of ultimately acts as a mediator and arbitrator to try and resolve disputes between tenants and landlords. But prior to getting to that stage, he has a number of other functions, such as issuing codes of practice to articulate kind of appropriate forms of behaviour, and similarly guidance notes as well to help interpret some of the agricultural holdings legislation, which is not exactly the easiest kind of batch of legislation to interpret. So having those codes of practice and guidance notes really helps improve tenant and landlord relationships. And also there's another chunk to that as well, which is very much around land access. So alongside the actual, helping the smooth running of the tenanted sector at the moment, there is the recognition that's been touched on previously that tenancies have been in kind of very significant decline, particularly over the last century. And also looking at some of those other barriers to entry as well. So not just around tenancies, but what are the other options that people can use to get into agriculture? And I think that's possibly worth kind of looking or taking a moment to have a look at the barriers as well. So land values, I think we'll probably skip through this relatively quickly because I think everyone's probably up to speed with what's going on, but certainly, there's a huge amount of speculation in the land market that's being compounded at the moment, both by a booming timber and forestry sector, but also speculation around natural capital, carbon credits, all those types of things as well. And land simply as an asset is simply unaffordable for a majority of aspiring or indeed many progressing farmers as well. We also have issues around succession planning, particularly in the owner-occupied sector. You may have kind of farmers who are asset rich because they own their farm, but actually have been quite cash poor, have probably spent most of their working lives barely scraping by. And the farm is very much seen as the pension pot for old age and once active farming becomes difficult. Although the flip side of that is because it is a life's work, it's often very difficult for those types of farmers to let go, particularly if they don't have a familial successor, they don't have children, or none of the children are interested, or nieces or nephews or anyone else. Bringing a complete stranger to work on the farm, or particularly one that's perhaps been in the family for a long time, is a huge ask for some of these people. So I think it's always worth being aware that there are multiple factors involved in kind of looking at farm succession. And then tax and subsidy, as has been touched on earlier, that we have seen a trend in consolidation over the past few decades. More recently, there's certainly a very strong argument that that's being driven by area-based payments as a system of subsidy. And of course, land ownership itself can provide tax advantages. So very much if you're looking at things like forestry, there are significant tax advantages available for tree planting and for forestry. And that obviously, if it's done on a commercial basis, tends to compete with agricultural land uses. So what are we doing? So back in, I think 2018 now, so possibly starting to get slightly out of date, we had a look at what was going on then and came up with 4 different areas for us to investigate further to try and improve land access. So we'll come on to all of these in turn. But joint ventures, tax incentives, a land matching service, and incubators were the 4 that they picked out. And we've since developed some more thinking on all of those and a couple of others as well. The research report itself is worth a read if you've got some time and inclination to do that, and it is available on our website, but it gives a much more detailed background and has some kind of interesting case studies as well. So we have published a guide to joint ventures based on this, very much looking at kind of what's available kind of in the marketplace at the moment, or as was back in 2018 anyway. So things like share farming, contracting partnerships, tenancies, and seasonal lets all offer different opportunities for both landlords and prospective tenants or new entrants. And essentially that guide is there to highlight those and kind of give a broad outline for both supporting farmers in developing their business interests, but also kind of providing that bit of background. And as you can see, you might be able to see from the logos there, it's got broad endorsement from various different bodies as well, which I think is another crucial thing and part of our work, ensuring that everyone is kind of on board with all these things. So that's really useful. The land matching service is something that we helped set up in partnership with the NFU, or the NFUS in Scotland, and the Scottish Government. That's now been running for just over 2 years. It was 2 in October. And essentially this is what we used to call Tinder for farmers, but I think it's more like Hinge because it's more tailor-made than Tinder is. So essentially what it does is it pairs kind of individuals who are seeking land or business opportunities in agriculture to those with land or who are looking for business opportunities to perhaps do something a bit innovative, a bit different. And the service itself can facilitate those initial meetings, support both parties in the drafting of agreements, provide some advice, and otherwise point to advisors who are perhaps better qualified to provide that advice if things really get moving. So that's been really positive. There have been, I think we're now up to about 4 matches have been concluded since the service started. There's another 8 or so, I think, underway at the moment. But very much, as probably wouldn't be a surprise to anyone, demand is outstripping supply by about 4 to 1. So for every 1 landowner or farmer that comes forward, looking to work with a new entrant or an aspiring farmer, we have about 4 new entrants or aspiring farmers coming forward seeking land. So the appetite for people to get into the industry is very, very strong, but the opportunities, I think, as we all know, are kind of fewer and far between. And I think this just highlights it through the experience of the land matching service as well. So farm business incubators, slightly different approach, and perhaps to pick up on some of the concerns that farmers in the land matching service have, is about the capabilities and the reputation of the people that they might be working with if they're complete strangers. So business incubators in other sectors of the economy are quite common. So if you think of tech startups or in biosciences, business incubator space is very much part of the landscape in those sectors and has been for some time. And essentially what an incubator does, it provides space in an agricultural case, that's land, but it also provides mentoring, business skills support, and potentially some funding support. So whether that's kind of capital grant or whatever it might be. And the idea of an incubator is it provides a safe space to focus on innovation. So rather than perhaps doing things in a conventional manner, doing something a bit different. Doing something a bit different is obviously risky, but who knows where the next kind of big change in agriculture is coming, the big change in land use, what the next the next blueberries or kind of product that no one thought about 20 years ago is going to be. You need to have those risk takers, and providing a safer environment for them to experiment and to develop a business is something that we see as really useful. And this very much follows successful models in particularly in France, but also in the US as well. And I was privileged to go on a trip to France to look at some of the incubators there a couple of years ago when we were allowed to do such things. And it's really interesting the way they work those, and the success rate they're having as well, and the speed at which their incubator program has developed. They've gone from 0 to about 50 units across France within about 15 years. So it's really rapidly taken off, and they're all full, and their successful kind of graduation rate is about 70%. So about 70% of those incubees, people who are on the incubator, go on to develop a fully fledged agricultural business once they've left it. So I think that's really positive, and there's a lot we can learn from that. And as it notes there, we have had some initial discussions with Scottish public landowners. Being a public agency, it's easier for us to get in the door with them than it is probably with anyone else. But COVID has kind of put a hold on that, and we'll see how things develop. Slightly related to that, the James Hutton Institute are looking at the feasibility of developing an incubator at their Glensock farm in Aberdeenshire. So I think that's something to keep a watch on as well. They may also wish to consider, and I think it might be slightly more useful if they consider their other farms, particularly outside Dundee, where there's a much bigger market than there would be up in the wilds of Aberdeenshire. But we'll see how that develops. But it's an exciting project anyway. And I think that's a good point to talk about Newbie. So as I said, I got to go to France, and that was with the Newbie project. So I've been kind of really pleased to be on the UK steering group for this. It's a European project, or pan-European project, involving 9 countries and led by the James Hutton as the UK partner, although largely everything they do is based in Scotland. And through that project, I've been able to kind of access that European network to really understand the common challenges that we have right across the continent, and things like land prices and the average age of farmers going up are shared by pretty much every single country in Europe, from here to Greece, and from Portugal to Finland. So those are common challenges, but we all have slightly different ways of addressing them, and work in slightly different systems. So there is actually a huge amount to learn from there. And building on that, the final exchange we had was a virtual exchange. It was just over a month ago, actually, at the beginning of October. And that was with the Netherlands. And they operate some really interesting cooperative land ownership models, because land prices in the Netherlands are, perhaps you'd expect, are at a premium, and they can reach up to, you're getting towards kind of €250,000 per hectare. So, and that's potentially for agricultural land. That's not building land. If you're in the development sector here, you might consider that, but that's actually, prime arable land on the outskirts of a large, kind of conurbation can easily go for that much. So, so land ownership is even more difficult in the Dutch system because of that expense. However, the cooperative model offers a really interesting solution to that. So one of the models we saw was with a cooperative landowner, and the shares in that the shares in the cooperative, or the members of the cooperative, has shares that range from about €100 each up to €25,000. So, and once you start to get 100 or 150 members, paying in, say, €25,000 a share, actually that builds up, quite quickly to be able to then afford to buy a reasonable kind of patch of agricultural land to develop a horticultural business or whatever it might be. And those investors as well, they do get a return. Crucially, it's a lower return than they might do from other sorts of investments. So it does very much depend on the cooperative kind of members' interests and what their aspirations are. But they also usually have an option for a return, not just in cash, but also in kind. So many of the cooperative landowner members decide, rather than kind of having a cash return every year, they will take their return in produce, and that's usually something like a weekly veg box. So that works really nicely for everyone involved. The other half of it, which I find really interesting as well, is that the tenant on that cooperative land is a separate management company, which is run by the farmer, who's also usually a co-op member as well, so therefore has a say in the terms that the landowner is setting. But crucially, I think for us in terms of succession, this is a really interesting model, because it allows the farmer, as they approach the end of their career and look towards retirement, to be able to sell shares in the management company to a new entrant or to an aspiring farmer in a way that doesn't interfere with the relationship between the legal tenant, which is the management company, and the cooperative landowner. So the management company remains the tenant in perpetuity, but the person who's running the management company changes. So it's a really interesting model. It is a bit more convoluted than perhaps we've got, but then again, perhaps given our agricultural holdings legislation, it isn't really that convoluted at all. And what I like about this as well is there's no theoretical barrier to using this type of model in Scotland or indeed in the UK. And I think in terms of the investment, I think this is something that I really kind of like, because as I've mentioned, a lot of the work we do is around urban land as well. And people will be aware that we have issues with the buy-to-let housing market in particular, and property prices rocketing. But if those investors in the buy-to-let market were to perhaps put their money into a landowning cooperative to then provide a start for a new entrant farmer, then not only do you have an investment in a safe asset, land is fairly safe, you'll get a reasonable return, you'll also help someone, and it's just a more productive way to be using that investment in the wider economy, and also hopefully helps tackle some of the housing crisis issues as well. And finally, I like, because this is potentially a slightly radical conference, or sometimes has a radical edge, I like to be a bit provocative and say perhaps this is the Dutch doing capitalism properly, but maybe not. We'll see. But that's it. So thank you.
Fantastic, James. I'll just come back in there. Brilliant. So yeah, I mean, I would be really interested in trying to get one of them off the ground here and just see it in practice and see if we could actually, if there's no barriers, let's explore it and let's see what we can do. I'm really excited to hear about the James Hutton incubator pilot, hopefully on their Glensoch farm. Again, we really interested in working together on that. So yeah, so it's been fantastic today. We're past our time. We've filled it very fully with lots of, I hope, interesting presentations from a diverse range of people, all working tenanted, let and leased land. Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Bridie and Lee, for taking the time to share this with us. It's fantastic to hear your stories and just hear about the challenges, the opportunities, and also how you move forward. And thank you, James. So grateful for the Land Commission in Scotland. I think, as we discussed earlier, there is interest in England and Wales in something similar. And I would say, yeah, it's a fantastic organisation. It's well worth having in place, especially as we are entering this massive transition in terms of our land use change and all the associated difficulties, conversations, priorities, inputs that are going to have to come to the fore. So brilliant. And I'm really sorry we haven't got time for question and answers, but what I'll say is NFFN are hosting Come and Meet Us, Come and Chat on Wednesday at the Northern Real Farming Conference. You'll see the session under online sessions. So please do come along and share your experiences, ask us questions. And there's some really good sessions happening, so encourage people to attend. There's 2 on agroforestry coming up, which is going to be a really important part of how we move forward with land management in Scotland, and lots of other different sessions on the online. So thank you, Northern Real Farming Conference, for hosting us, and thank you all for contributing. It's been a wonderful session, and we'll catch up soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsty.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks.
Bye bye.